I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Alyse. Alyse, are you here with us?
I am. I don't know if you can see me. I can't see myself there, but can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, wonderful. Yes,
Awesome.
I am here.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction, and then would you like to share your screen?
I would love to share my screen if that's going to be possible. That would be great.
Awesome. So we'll get you set up with that. But first, everyone, we are so fortunate today to have Alyse here with us to hear her story. Alyse is the co-founder, CEO, and president of Vital Voices, an organization that invests in fearless women leaders across the world. Under Alyse's leadership, Vital Voices has served over 18,000 women across 182 countries. Newsweek magazine has named Alyse one of the 150 women shaking the world. Fortune magazine featured her as one of the 55 most influential women on Twitter, and Apolitical named her as one of the 100 most influential people in global gender policy. Her work has been honored with awards such as the Tribeca Disruptive Innovation Award and Foreign Policy's Citizen Diplomat Award of the Year. Alyse is the author of the best-selling book, Vital Voices, The Power of Women Leading Change Around the World, and editor of Vital Voices, 100 Women Using Their Power to Empower. So without further ado, let's give Alyse Nelson a very warm welcome. So thank you, Alyse. I'll stop screen sharing and then it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And hello to everyone. I'm so thrilled to be with you. I've had a crazy morning and it's just so wonderful to now get to talk about all the things that I love to talk about. One of the things that Vital Voices did recently is we purchased a building in a historic place in Washington, D.C. It's on 16th Street, just a couple blocks up from Black Lives Matter Plaza. And we've had a big delay in our construction. So I've been dealing with that all morning. And I'm just like so happy to now be with all of you to talk about what I think really drives me and gives me great energy. And I think sharing that with you, I know will do the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to share my screen here. Oh, sorry, I'm not used to using this one. Usually I use, just trying to think where's the ability to do it as, sorry, I never use this. I'm always using,
I think you can click the bottom at the button at the very bottom next to the minus symbol. You see the zoom out.
You mean on this side over here? I feel like it's normally over here, isn't it? No.
It's in the gray bar at the bottom of the screen. It's right next to the minus sign.
Ah, perfect. Thank you.
There.
Great.
Teamwork.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Apologize. I'm normally always sharing things in a PDF form. And so I'm not used to working in PowerPoint. So I was like, uh-oh. Anyway, but I wanted to just start off actually really sharing a really brief film with you. It's only 90 seconds, but I feel like it will really set the stage. What I wanted to share with you all is today is really the lessons that I've learned in leadership from women around the world and how it has really shown me, and I've written about it in both of the books that I've written, or the second one that I edited, really how women lead differently. And that difference is desperately needed in our world today, but that it's not about men, right? That they bring forth this new model. And that model, I believe, is changing the way we all think about leadership. And so I'm just going to start off by playing the short film and then move into the presentation and hopefully my own personal story as well.
My computer. It's like moving it to here. That's why.
Oh, that's better.
Everything okay? Oh,
Look, Jordan.
okay, well, I might be having some technical difficulties there. Yeah. Sorry. Well, my computer, I now have the windmill of death here. Anyway, so we will move along. What I want to just show you is just a really brief film about some of the women leaders that we work with and their motivation for leadership, where it came from. And what we find, I think more often than not, is that a person's path to leadership is never planned out perfectly. It is that moment or that decision that they decide to make that choice and stand up for what they believe in. And this sort of purpose first leadership, I think, is precisely what our world needs. So just a little bit about Vital Voices. We were founded nearly 20 years ago on the heels, nearly almost 24 years ago now, on the heels of the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. And really that was, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that conference. It obviously happened 26 years ago, but that conference really was a watershed moment for the global women's movement. That was the first time really that women from all over the globe came together. If you think about it, in 1995, Google did not exist, right? It didn't come online until 98. Social media, that was not a term, right? That did not exist. The internet was like the World Wide Web, which was like very nascent. It was not something where you could chat with people, where you could meet people. There were not really pictures even. Think about there were not really pictures at that time, like on the web. There was no like video interaction, right? Not really in terms of the way that the mass of people interacted. And of course, very few people around the world actually had access to technology. So if you wanted to go, and meet women from around the world, you couldn't do it right here in your computer. You had to actually fly there, go there, and meet with them. And so this was a huge moment. And really out of that conference, Vital Voices was born as simply an idea of how do we bring women together, but also recognize the leadership that they are pioneering in their countries. And one of the things that we began to recognize after working with 18,000 women across 182 countries is that traditional models of leadership were just not the way in which these women were doing it. And so they often did not think of themselves as leaders. They were looking at leaders in their countries, and these leaders were like top down, hierarchical. They were not the kind of leaders that they were, which is just, I get up every day and I'm doing the right thing. I'm serving my community. They didn't have title. They didn't have position. They didn't have a ton of people reporting to them. They didn't have the corner office, right? They didn't have the big salary or being elected or anointed, right? They were just doing it. And so they really didn't, when they heard the word leader, they wouldn't think of themselves as that. And so what we've been on a journey to do is really redefine what it means to actually be a leader. And so what we do is we really search the world for women who have that daring vision for change, whether it be combating human trafficking or ending child marriage or starting up a new tech business to deal with the water crisis in India, or working to get new legislation passed, or working to get women the ability to stand for elected office, as we did in Kuwait about 15 years ago. And why we do this? Well, first off, empowering women, advancing women is actually really, really good for the world. And when I started on this journey 25 years ago, this data did not exist. It is more recent data that has developed over the last 5 to 10 years. So $92 billion, that is how much 65 of the lowest income countries in the world would gain, okay, $92 billion each year if girls were educated at the same level of boys. So you think about what you could do with $92 billion in the lowest income countries around the world. That's like solving water issues, solving hunger issues, infrastructure. There is a tremendous amount you could do with that money. And that is what would happen if girls were educated at the same rate as boys in those countries. 1.5 trillion, this is a very low estimate. Some estimates are as high as 6 trillion. And that's what the global economy would gain every year if we ended domestic violence. Why does domestic violence cost so much money to our economy? Loss of productivity, lawsuits and legal issues, police, shelters, loss of school days. Just imagine all of that and the toll it takes on our economy. So you can imagine if we could end that, what that would mean. And then the largest number here, 28 trillion. And that's what the global economy would gain by 2025 if women had the same economic opportunities as men around the world. So what we know from seeing all this data is that this is a win-win. This is not a win-lose strategy. This is not, oh, if we empower women, men lose. No, this is about, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? This makes good economic sense. And that was a really important argument in this space, as you can imagine, because so many people thought, well, I have power. Why would I share my power? Well, why do I want to empower women? How will it make a difference? And so showing the data, obviously, as you can imagine, is really important. So that was one of our early steps that we knew we needed to take. But what we began to realize over time is that investing in and empowering women is not just an economic force, right? And people, The Economist magazine has talked about how forget China, forget India, women are the economic force that will, be that rising tide around the world. They are stronger than all those things combined. But what we know is that even though women are an economic force, they're also a leadership force. Women lead differently. They are more collaborative. They are more inclusive. This has been documented. I've seen this over 25 years, but it's also now been documented. And I think certainly if we think over the last year, we've seen a lot more of this more inclusive, more cause-driven, more collaborative, more empathetic leadership style. And so that's certainly what we've been learning and seeing on the ground for the last years. And really, quite frankly, I think that traditional sort of management theory is really catching up to that. And people are now talking about how this style of leadership, of being the collaborator, the mentor, the one who is empowering others, being inclusive, that model of leadership is a more successful model. So one of the things that we began to see as we were working with women around the world who didn't see themselves as leaders is that they had these common traits, these commonalities across all their differences, right? We worked across 182 countries, but whether it was a graffiti artist in Brazil or a peace activist in Northern Ireland or something somewhere in between, that women who were effectively leading change, yet didn't have the formal title of leadership, right? Like being a president, being a CEO, right? This is the way that they were doing it. And they were effectively impacting the lives of other people. They were effectively making lasting change. And initially, I started pulling out these ideas basically because I was trying to convince women who were coming into our network that they were leaders. They wouldn't believe me. No, I'm just a woman who gets up every day and does the right thing. No, but you're a leader, and here's why. And so I started calling out these traits, and I was giving a speech about it at a conference and sharing some of these stories. And this woman who was from a publishing company came up to me and she says, "You've got to publish a book about this." And I think the most powerful thing, not just sharing it with other people, but has really been for women in our network to recognize that this actually is leadership. And not only is this leadership, but as I said, and I'll say again, it is the kind of leadership our world needs to solve these emerging and enduring challenges. So first, a driving force or a sense of mission. So what we've recognized over the years is that leaders who truly are successful at making change understand that change will take time and that you need something that's feeding you as a leader, right? And so if you had a personal experience and you step up to make change because of that personal experience, good or bad, right? But just something that had a lot of impact on you, really shook you, gave you that sort of fire in the belly, that if you are purpose first, and motivated by that driving force. You have that personal mission statement. You know what you are about. Not only will more people follow you and see your leadership as more authentic, but they will also come along to your ideas. And so ultimately you will be more effective. And that's the kind of leadership that people are craving. Second, we found that these women leaders had strong roots in the communities that they were serving. So for example, they weren't just, saying, here's my idea, everybody here, listen to me because I'm the leader. They went in listening first. They had great empathy, they had great compassion, they gained people's trust. And once they began to do that, then they would form their own ideas about the way things needed to change. So they had that strong vision. They knew change needed to happen. It came from a personal experience. They had that personal mission statement. But how they went about making that change was based on what they knew the people.
Where is she?
Sorry. Did somebody say something? No, I don't know. And then third, they have the ability to connect across lines that divide. So that's about really putting your ego aside. It goes back to this first driving force, right? If you are so committed to bringing about change, you're going to do whatever it takes to get there, right? It means that you're not about power for the sake of power for the sake of ego and platform and all of what that might bring. You're about power for the sake of empowering others. And if you're about that, you are willing to cross those lines that typically divide, whether they be political lines, whether they be cultural lines, whether they be sector lines. You're willing to understand that, okay, I can go faster alone. I can go farther with great partners. And so that's what that's about. And if you look around the world from, the Northern Ireland Peace Accords to bringing about and working towards peace in Somalia, it has always been building that infrastructure in the community, at that grassroots, often with women, with their children, integrating schools so that they can in the future then have that ability and that understanding to bring about change. So fourth, bold ideas and bold action. A lot of times we assume that there's one way of making change because that's the way it's always been done. And anytime you've got leaders around a table who are all X's, right? And the one O comes into the table, the one who's different, whether it be a woman, whether it be a person of color, whether it be someone from a different sector, they're going to probably bring a different perspective. But often their voices are silenced. Those new ideas are silenced because there are so few of them around the table, right? One of the things that I have seen so clearly is that, if we want to solve the challenges before us, whether it be climate change, whether it be racial injustice, it is not going to be the typical strategies, right? I mean, I think we're all kind of at that point when we look at like racial justice in our country, like it is not going to be the same old that is going to solve this issue. It is going to be engaging people who have not been engaged, people who've not been at the table, people who are deeply on the front lines, who are dealing with these issues on a daily basis, and trust in them that those bold, crazy ideas that they have that have never been tried, but are the closest to the problem, are actually the breakthrough solutions. And I have so many stories, which I probably don't have time to tell you all today, about women who have taught me again and again that idea that just because it hasn't been done, trust that gut and that instinct that you have, because we need those bold, crazy ideas. That's what ultimately creates the breakthrough change. And then finally, what we found with so many women leaders we work with around the world is that they have this incredible resolve to pay it forward, right? That they gain opportunity and it fills them up and they immediately are like, I'm going to explode. I've got to share this with somebody. I have to turn around and empower someone else. And that is not the way, as I was coming into my career, it was like, women, they climb up the ladder and then they pull it up after them. They're not going to be supportive of you. And I have to say, working with women all over the globe, all over this country, that is absolutely not what I have found. what I have found is that when women gain opportunity and a seat at the table, they do look around to say, who else can I bring along? Because they know, the importance of that differing voice. And they know that it can't just be one voice or two voices. It needs to be at least three or more, 30% to actually have that impact. So, Jenny, if we have time before we take questions, I'd love to just tell you about my own personal story as to how I got involved in Vital Voices, and really sort of how I developed my driving force, which I would never have recognized as my driving force, but I began to realize it was such a touchstone in my life, and so much of my journey was built upon it. So, do I have time to do that?
Absolutely. We'd love to hear that.
Okay. All right. So, a driving force. I talked earlier about the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, and it took place in 1995. And in 1995, you'll be able to do the math. I was 21 years old. I was between my junior year and senior year of college, and I was going to school in Boston, although I'm originally from California. I'm actually in LA, so not far. Well, I don't actually where everybody is right now, but not far from where you might have been. And I was desperate to understand my place in the world. I mean, we heard about this thing called the World Wide Web coming, but it was like very nascent days. People would talk about the global economy and, that people are all going to be connected one day. But I wondered what that meant. And I was very interested in women's issues. I was very interested in women's rights, human rights. But there was very little you could read about these issues in the newspaper. There was very little, that you could learn about it. And, I knew I needed to go somewhere. I needed to meet with women. And I complete randomly, was talking with someone at the United Nations because I was trying to set up an organization on my college campus, really around young women learning about global women's issues and sort of our place in this increasingly global world, and knowing the rights and opportunities that my mother's generation, grandmother's generation, and great grandmother's generation had to fight for, and knowing what all I had, but also knowing that we can't take those gains for granted, and that things can slip backwards, and still so much cultural change needs to happen. And I randomly heard about this Fourth World Conference on Women. It was going to be the largest gathering of women ever in history. 55,000 women from 189 countries were going to gather to sign on to the most progressive document, still to this date, the most progressive document ever signed by that many countries for women's rights. And it had 12 critical areas of concern. But what excited me was not the document, it was the people. It was going and connecting with all these activists and leaders. And I just thought, I'm going to be surrounded by this and I'm going to learn everything there is to learn. And sure enough, I did. But I had to get there first. And it was quite a difficulty getting there. I actually signed up, sent in all my paperwork to the Chinese organizing committee. But unfortunately, the Chinese got a little taste of what was coming. And they were very, very concerned, because they started to realize they didn't sign up for a knitting festival of women. They realized what we signed up for are women's human rights activists coming to China. And that really scared them. They had just come off, the violence in Tiananmen Square. They were trying to gain credibility in the global community, on the global stage. They had just lost a bid for the Olympics. They got it later, of course, but at that time they had just lost it, and they thought, well, what can we do to have standing in the global community? And now they signed up for this, and they didn't realize what they were signing up for. And so what they were doing is trying to keep people out who they couldn't actually verify, right? And back these days, it was very hard to verify people. And so if you weren't really part of a known organization, they simply just didn't ever send you your credentials. And so you never got in the mail the information that you needed, the passes that you needed to be able to get a visa that you needed to be able to get into China for this conference. You could get into China if you're a tourist through a different kind of visa, but you needed a conference visa to then get into the conference, okay? So I didn't ever get that conference visa. And I went down to the Chinese consulate every day saying, I will not be silenced. I must go to this conference. They haven't sent me this. And we were hearing a lot more in the press about how they were trying to keep people out. And so one day I'm there and this young man and I would show, I mean, literally it was like 2 weeks. I was there every day sitting, and they were like, we're not going to give you your visa today. I mean, now I think this is nuts. Like, they're like, yeah, you still don't have your paperwork. We're not going to give you your visa in like the nicest possible way, but like, it's not going to happen. So one day I'm there after 2 weeks and, nice, gentleman at the window who had seen me there, and seen me get more and more frustrated, said, listen, meet me around the corner in 20 minutes. I'm like, okay. So I go and I meet him around the corner in 20 minutes. I'm thinking this is very weird. And he says, listen, you're never going to get in. They're not going to let you in. They're trying to keep people out. What you need to do is apply for a tourist visa. And then when you get to China, they will let you into the conference because they won't want an angry feminist roaming the streets. So that's what I did. And I didn't, it was a little more complicated to get in, but I did finally get into the conference. But as you can imagine, so much, I mean, I don't speak Chinese. I'd never been to China. And here I am, like kind of somewhat under the radar, somewhat kind of illegally trying to get in and go to this conference, right? So this is, I worried my parents just a little bit. I told my dad, I said, oh, I'm going to the Beijing conference, the women's conference, Beijing, Texas, no, Beijing, China. But it was an incredible experience for me, being surrounded by all these women, learning about all these issues. I remember I saw a poster that said, stop trafficking in women and girls. And I thought, what is that, trafficking in? What does that mean? Like it's a disease in their body? Like, what is this? Because the word human trafficking, that there was modern day slavery around the world, that was not known in 1995. The legislation that I actually ended up coming to work on in this country had not been created yet. We obviously have anti-slavery legislation, but no legislation about protecting victims. So if someone is brought to the United States illegally and their passport is seized, they are treated like a criminal, not like the victim who was lured or tricked or kidnapped, right? So I was learning about all these issues. I was becoming very full of everything. And I was thinking, oh my God, why did I feel compelled to come? I mean, I'm just a 21-year-old college student. Like I came to learn, all these other women came to fight. What can I do? What can I do? I'm like racking my brain because I do believe like we're called to do things and we get messages about, this is what I believe. We are given opportunities and we take advantage of them or we don't take advantage of them. But I was like, okay, I'm supposed to do something. And really on the last day of the conference, I got my answer. So on the last day of the conference, Hillary Clinton, then First Lady of the United States, was coming out to speak at the conference. And as you can imagine, a lot of people did not want her to come and speak. I mean, there is a hilarious film about this called Once and for All, which is on, I don't remember if it's Netflix or, anyway, I'm sorry that I can't remember, but it is so hilarious because everybody thought like, why are you going to this conference? You can't speak out on policy issues. You're going to say the wrong thing. She decides she's going to go anyway. And I still remember, this is my badge from the conference that was so difficult to get with my made up NGO right there. I made that up. Anyway, but here she is speaking at the conference. And what was so powerful about the speech that she gave and sitting there listening to her is that all the issues that we've been talking about, from human trafficking to child marriage to, honor crimes, all of these issues were not on the world stage, were not known. And the people who were reporting on the conference were more interested in reporting on how weird it was that the Chinese government was hosting a conference about women's human rights, and yet like they don't have a great record, right? But they weren't really talking about the substance of the conference. And what was so incredible about her coming, I think she somewhere in her head knew this, that if she spoke, even in a pre-social media era, her words would spread like wildfire. If she gave this speech, and this is the speech where she said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. You probably heard that slogan. This was the hair she had when she gave that very famous speech. and she actually, it's very funny. This movie is so good. If you are enjoying any of this history, the movie Makers created Once and For All is just, it's fabulous, because she talks about how she wore that pink suit as sort of a joke. Like, I'm going to show up, I'm going to give this like speech where I'm going to stick it to countries around the world who have abused women's rights. And I'm going to say no more. And I'm going to do it all in a pink suit. And so it was a really, really powerful, it was a really powerful moment, certainly for me. And I realized right then and there that here's a woman who has voice and power, and she recognizes that. She may not have like the formal position. A lot of people think she shouldn't be talking out, but at the same time, reporters are going to show up, maybe because they think she's not going to say something right. I mean, she hit the ball out of the park. It was incredible. But what was so amazing is obviously her words were powerful, and they spread, and they created that awareness of these issues of this conference. And I recognize that everyone who has a voice has power. Everyone who has passion in that voice has, 3 times the amount of power. And so I knew what I needed to do is I needed to use my voice. I needed to use the little bit of power that I had to speak out on these issues. And that's what I did. I returned to my university. I held a big gathering. I had like 3,000 young people from all over the Boston area who came to it to talk about what happened at that conference and to talk about women's rights as human rights. And someone from the White House came up to that conference. I had invited them to come up, and they said, you got to come work for us. Come down as an intern, but eventually we'll figure out, how to get you paid, because we need more young people speaking out on these issues and being the voice. And I tell you that story because I think that trip, that story has always been like a touchstone for me, because it was the moment when I, one, took like a crazy risk because everything was against me in going, but I kind of had this gut belief I should go. And I saved and borrowed. I mean, I bought the cheapest ticket I could find. I stayed in these like crazy, barracks that were like $2 a night and had no hot water. But I mean, it was an experience, right? And I think when we have these experiences, and they're both good and bad experiences, I'm sorry, my kids. But when we have these experiences in life, and I mean, there's many stories that I could tell you about women we work with whose driving force did not come from a positive experience, actually came from tragedy. But when we have these experiences that shake us, that define us and who we are, I think if our leadership comes from that place, that is what is so deeply pure. And for me, my driving force has always been, and I feel like you should be able to sum up your driving force in like 6 or 7 words, but it's always been use my power and my voice to empower others. And so that's my true north as a leader. And I hold myself accountable to that, but I also seek other leaders to work with who I see doing the same, who I see really understanding that voice and privilege and power are an opportunity, and it's an opportunity to give back, to support, to empower. And the more that you do that, it's like a boomerang, it will always come back to you. That power really does expand the moment it's shared. And so I have many stories of different women that we've worked with. This woman you probably know well, Amanda Gorman, who's been part of our network for 5 years now, 6 years, and now is actually on the banner in front of that new building that I was telling you a bit about. But, her driving force has always been that her voice is her superpower. But I think, as probably know her story well, she grew up with a speech impediment. She was made fun of, she was bullied. And because of that, she started reading and she started writing. And through that, she found her voice, but it was a voice on paper. But people began to ask her to perform, and then more and more and more opportunities came. And suddenly she realized that that very thing that she thought was her greatest impediment actually was her greatest strength. So I think for each of us, it's different. But I think the thing that I would encourage all of you, on your life journey is that if you want to know your purpose, don't look outside yourself. look at the experiences that you've had, what impacts you, what people say about you, what you feel you want your legacy to be. But it's not out there as much as it's in here, right? And I think, put yourself out there to be able to find those experiences. But really, that's what Vital Voices is all about. It's about finding women who do use their power to empower and really supporting them and amplifying them, right? And that's what we really do through training, through support, connecting them with a network of their peers, is really to help amplify and uplift them so that they can empower others. One woman leader in Russia that I've worked with for years one time said, the way that I sum up Vital Voices, the way I think about Vital Voices, and she was at our very first gathering that we did back in 1997. She said, Vital Voices is taking care of those people who are taking care of the world. So as you can imagine, my job never gets old. There is constant inspiration. Anyway, so I know I think we're breaking into groups for pitches, right?
Yes, actually, but first off, thank you for sharing your story, Alyse, and especially that personal story at the end. It's so awesome to see how your determination just by attending this event and persevering and making sure it happened was really like the momentum that set so much more into motion. So thank you for sharing all of that. So we will.
Absolutely.
We will kick off the Empower Her pitches. We'd love for you to stay if you're available, but certainly understand if your schedule's too busy right now, especially with the building and construction happening. We understand. But I do want to take this time to let everyone get up to speed with, what you can expect for the duration of the event. And Alyse, if anyone has questions for you, what's the best way? Should they reach out to you on Twitter, or is that a good medium to reach you?
Why not Twitter? I'm not very good on Twitter, even though they named me the most influential. And that was a while ago. I should take that out of my bio. It's not really that true anymore. I think I was just one of the earlier adopters, but you can just email me. It's just Alyse Nelson at vitalvoices.org. So you can see my name here, of course, and it's just my full name at vitalvoices.org. And feel free to reach out. We have always, lots of opportunities at Vital Voices with various fellowships that we have and internships and all kinds of different ways to get engaged. So we certainly welcome that.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Alyse. We really appreciate it.